Welcome back to episode 9 of the Asking for Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Mabe, and today we are going to talk about player development. So I've already talked briefly about expectations, but today we're going to go a little deeper into more specific things to think about as it relates to player development and appropriate training by appropriate stages, what's actually happening in the different stages in the younger ages, really under 12. If this is your first time listening, we do focus on younger players. So our core focus as an organization is to help young players master the mechanics, mentality, and joy of baseball. And so our focus is always going to be those younger ages and what's going on with them. And really the podcast itself is an attempt to get to the first principles of everything youth baseball. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty and really understand what's going on. Run into a lot of people that are not happy with the current state of both youth baseball, but also youth sports in general. And so want to dig deeper. I certainly have my own opinions, but let's take a deep dive and understand what's actually happening. Is this good for our kids? Is it not? What is it producing? And go from there. Maybe it's the best we can do. Maybe not. This episode is starting to veer towards our Asking the Experts version of our episodes. So we have 3 different types. We've got Asking Out Loud, which is me, your host, just ranting and raving, teaching and coaching, questioning and challenging, all different types of things, and just sharing some knowledge that I've accumulated, but also presenting questions for us to try to figure out together in this process to better understand what's going on out there in youth baseball. Second version is Asking the Experts, and this is a weird version of that today. So it's really me. I've kind of done a deep dive the last few weeks into the science of youth player development, and so this is kind of veering in that direction, although we don't have an actual expert on the pod today. Eventually we will. Working on lining those up at the current moment. But we're going to start heading that direction because I want, as parents, I want you to know, as coaches, as human beings, I want you to know and understand more about what's going on. And my hope is through us understanding more and having better answers to the questions, we can end up in a I don't want to say a better place, but we end up in a place where we understand where we are, why we're there, and how it's affecting our kids and our relationships. So again, let's get right into it. Talking about expectations as it relates to young athletes' development. And again, my hope would be that this episode gives us a better perspective on what to expect from our kiddos as they progress through the journey of development. And we're talking specifically athletic development, but it also, the main component of that is physical development. There are way too many things for me to cover for this to be another standalone episode. So get ready, because we're going to go down a super deep rabbit trail, and some folks may be interested in that, and I may have to do some caveats that it gets scientific. That's probably not the right word, but it's going to go deep into physiology and development and energy systems and muscle fiber, cross sections of muscle fiber, and all to different types of things. So people just have a better idea of what's going on with their kids. I just think we're way too surface level as it stands right now in understanding where our kids at and what's appropriate for them based on their stage of development. So again, look for that down the road. But I want to take you mentally for a brief second to the fields of coach pitch baseball. And if you've been through this, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. T-ball, pretty low expectations from parents, from fans, from family members, from coaches. Everybody's kind of laughing, having a good time. There's a few that take it really seriously, but by and large, not a lot of expectations for the players. You don't expect them to make plays, and that's pretty standard procedure. Well, bump it up a notch and picture yourself at the first levels of coach pitch. So here in North Carolina, that's roughly ages 6, 7, and 8, something like that. I don't know that I've seen a more raucous environment than those games. The parents are screaming. The coaches are screaming. Again, not every game, but it is like there is an intensity at that age group that I just have not seen matched at many other age groups, unless there's some chippy type situation where the parents are griping back and forth or the umpire's bad or something like that. And so I look at it and say, okay, well, why is that? Like, why is that? And, you know, you look at it and say, well, it's not T-ball anymore. So we already discussed T-ball's pretty low expectations, but it's not. It's like a step of development where in some ways we expect them to be a little further along than they are. And so we expect them to start making plays. Some of the kids are starting to throw harder. Some of the kids are fielding better. Some of the kids are hitting better. And so there's this expectation that starts to creep into it. And I think it just makes people crazy because, yes, they are older, but they just don't have the ability to execute consistently. And some teams do. But by and large, the biggest broad cross-section of teams are just not able to consistently execute. And, you know, as we've said on previous episodes, when there's a gap between expectation and reality, you can expect emotion. And I don't want to sound judgmental, but it's what happens. It's what happens on the field of play. And so it's one of those things that I think we need to take a quick time out on and kind of get to the bottom of what's going on, because I don't know that it's great for that age group of kids to really ratchet up the expectations just, you know, 1 or 2 seasons out of T-ball. I mean, for crying out loud, a coach is still pitching to them. So anyway, just an interesting observation. But point being, the developmental approach, kind of coming back around to the topic of the podcast, is the developmental approach needs to be tailored by the age group, not just because of where they are in chronological age, but also where they are in biological age and mentally. There's really no one-size-fits-all. And our research, and this is from an asking for knowledge standpoint, but our research has helped us develop a philosophy that kids need an all-around program that develops athleticism, that builds a strong neurological foundation for good movement so that when they hit puberty, they can immediately see significant gains in a safe and effective manner. And in case you're wondering what my experience level is with this, I did own a CrossFit gym for about 5 years, and we had classes for kids. And so I got to see what a good foundational program does for athletes. And it's transformative in terms of what, once they take that next step and begin to get their growth hormones, that it really that once they have that base established, they can really kind of rocket up the developmental charts. But if you've not developed that base, if the kids are specializing, then you lose an opportunity there. And so again, talking today about the specific stages of development, and my hope is that just as parents, as coaches, we get a better understanding so that we can manage these expectations. This is part 2 on expectations. And so I think this is like the third attempt to explain what's going on here. I do apologize for that, but it's just I want us to understand how big of a role expectations play in how we treat our kids, what we sign them up for, what we send them to, the ride home, the ride to, the all that stuff that goes into this. Just having something that's a reality check against that. Again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what you've been doing. I just hope that it's based in reality. And I hope it's based in reality for me. I've got a player too, and so I want to make sure that I get as close to that as possible. But I do have a theory that this will help us. If we have this understanding, this will help us create better humans and ultimately better athletes. And it does that by keeping us from falling into one of 2 traps. The first trap I've kind of covered several times already, but that's the trap of high expectations. That's the trap where we're holding them to a standard that they're really not physically or mentally prepared for. And it's arbitrary, and it's something that we've come up with in our own mind as to where they should be and how they should act and how they should play and how they should perform. So there's that. Now, on the other side of that, I don't want to set super low expectations. I don't want us to be juice box parents and coaches and teams. We got to have some level of a standard. So low expectations is really not the answer either. I think the real answer lies in appropriate standards. I'd like to do away entirely with expectations. I think standards is a much better way of looking at this. And, standards, again, I'm not going to get into this today, but standards just being a way of being in the world, a way of focusing on the things that you control and addressing the things you can't control only with the things you can't control. Again, that's kind of a roundabout way of saying it, but I don't want us to end up on either end of the spectrum. Too high of expectations, too low of expectations, expectations that aren't appropriate for their age of development, and stress and strain and lack of enjoyment, early burnout, all the good stuff that we just continue to read more and more about in the research. So think about this. In virtually all athletic environments, and we're talking baseball, so there's kids that, and I guess this is really true all the way through, in fairness. Bigger, faster, stronger athletes typically are more successful, they win at a higher rate, and they typically are just better by virtue of them being bigger, faster, stronger. And where this manifests in the young kids is, you have several kids that are very physically advanced. They are bigger, faster, stronger. And so we see that their skill development is higher as a result. And so we watch it and we say, well, they have a significant skills advantage over my kid. Like, I've got to do something. My kid is at a deficit. My kid is not going to get where they need to go because they're not where this kid is at. And so we push them into more training, more lessons, more teams, more. And the reality is these bigger, stronger, faster kids are just at a different developmental age or biological age than our children. Or maybe we're a coach and we've got 2 or 3 that are studs, and then we've got some that, are struggling athletically. And, it's easy to say, golly, I'm tired. I've got these 3. Obviously, these 3 can get it, so all the kids can get it, right? It's just these 3, So now I'm going to cut 4 off this team and try to bring on a few more good ones. And you see this happen over and over. It happens every season. Teams are created and teams fall apart, and it's usually 3, 4, 5, whatever, break off, and then a super team gets developed, and then another below average team gets developed. And I don't know that it's good. It is what it is, but that's just an observation. But this is what happens. And so we bring expectations for our kids when we really need to bring patience first and a process second. And I know, believe me, I'm a parent, I'm a coach. I know and understand that patience is not the word that you want to hear when it comes to your child's athletic success. We all want to see them succeed now and succeed at the highest level and, dominate the world. And again, it's that we want the best for our children. There's nothing wrong with saying that. It manifests in a lot of different ways. But if we are not careful in these early stages, we immediately migrate to skill acquisition when really we would be much better off, our children would be much better off if we focused on overall athleticism and really a program or a training program that is geared towards maximizing their genetic potential. But we focus on skills because it's more productive short term. My kid strikes out less, my kid hits the ball hard more, Those are immediate rewards in the game. And meanwhile, athleticism kind of goes by the wayside. We'll hire pitching coaches, we'll hire hitting coaches, we'll hire fielding coaches, we'll hire catching coaches, but we rarely deal with athleticism, especially in baseball. So we chase those skills based on what is a perceived gap, which in reality, many, many times turns out to just be a biological age gap. One of the pieces of this that's important to talk about is really taking a long-term view, okay? Understanding that expertise under any circumstances takes time. Over and over and over again, research has shown that expertise is built over many thousands of hours of time spent in the discipline. We've got time. So what we really need to do is focus on building a foundation for our kids that gives them what they need so they can be bigger, faster, stronger, along with acquiring those skills later. If we chase the skills right now, early in their development, we miss a window of opportunity. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Actually, just kidding. I'm going to talk about it right now. So let's talk about development, and let's talk about developmental stages. So I guess to define this in more specific terms, what I'm talking about, when I say athletic performance, if you talk to a sports scientist in this field, they would most likely call this physical work capacity. Okay, so don't get caught up in the terminology, but just understand it's a part of what would be considered overall athletic performance. So physical work capacity is one part, and then exploitation capabilities is another part. So there's two parts that kind of combine for overall sports performance. And let me break these down a little bit further. So physical work capacity is it's a category that includes things like endurance. It includes things like strength. It includes things like speed, coordination, flexibility. So all of the traditional things that you think about, and I'll say typically with working out or physically training in some way. So again, endurance, speed, strength, coordination, flexibility. From the exploitation capability side of things, this is where you come in with things like skills and technique and tactics. So as I'm talking about this, and what I just referenced is many times we see kids that appear to have the exploitation capability side of thing. They appear to have the skills, they appear to have the technique, and really what you are witnessing, what you are seeing are kids that actually just have greater physical work capacity. Now again, are there kids that are great at 5 and 6 and 7 years old that just continue to be great and go all the way through? Absolutely. Absolutely. But by and large, what you are witnessing are kids that are just advanced for their age. So, those two categories combine for overall sports performance. So physical work capacity, exploitation capabilities, those two go together, and that's what you've got for performance. So let's talk, I guess, deeper on the physical work capacity side of thing. So there are, as children age, there are what's called windows of opportunity and sensitive periods. So these are periods where either the child has rapid growth, or there are periods where there are intense, maybe it's neurological development, maybe it's motor skills development, maybe it's visual proprioception and awareness development, maybe it's kinesthetic awareness. There are all these different periods where these children are basically sensitive to growth, and where training during those periods can really, really improve results. Now, there is a downside. You will see reduction in ability once you experience the rapid growth of puberty. So there is a period where it's actually detrimental if you're not careful, if you don't train appropriately. Let me say it that way, because it's not, there's always opportunity for training. It's just during that rapid growth phase, you just need to make sure that all the resources and everything is in line with the current phase of where they're at. So I don't mean to get into that, because we're not getting into really puberty and post-puberty development. This is really for the younger kids. But anyway, I share that just so you understand what we're talking about. So during these windows of opportunity, the big thing that matters most is the environment with which the child is, I guess, spends their time in. Maybe that's the way of saying it. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of studies on this. I will throw in this caveat. And the reason being is, I don't know about you, but I'm not signing my kids up for studies. And I think the majority of, parents probably feel the same way. And the science community, is going to obviously steer clear of anything that harms children. And so there's not a ton of research in these areas specifically to kids, but there has been a lot of research in animals. And what they have found is that the environmental factors, an enriched environment produces larger brain sizes, more adaptations, more positive improvements. We'll call them positive adaptations. A deprived environment produces the opposite. So smaller brains, lower adaptation, lower improvements. And really the difference between the two is just an enriched environment has tons of stimulus. It has new challenges. It has things to figure out. It spurs curiosity. It is intrinsically rewarding. And a deprived environment really has none of that. And so we just really need to be aware when we talk about physical work capacity and development, in understanding that a lot of stimulus, a lot of different things are really, really good for children. And that exposure in an enriched environment during sensitive windows does potentially optimize and enhance their structural growth and motor performance abilities. So they have the opportunity through the enriched environment to experience the right kind of growth and the best kind of growth. And this is where, again, you hear all the time, kids should play multiple sports. And in fairness, some kids just don't. My son just does not like other sports. He likes baseball, and that's it. And so it's a struggle, but I really try to just stay hands off. And if he wants to shoot basketball, shoot basketball. If he wants to throw football, throw football. If he wants to do other stuff. And so trying to make sure that the things that he's doing, while not formal, provide a broad athletic base for him to develop from. It's very important. And it's important for your kids too. Baseball, there's the planes of motion, and there's things that you do in baseball that just are only baseball related. And if you don't develop in other areas, they're gonna be lacking an athletic base, and they're not gonna maximize their potential. And so again, going back, if we chase skills at these early ages, we're gonna miss an opportunity for physical work capacity improvement. So just meditate on that for a minute. Here was a factoid that I was really kind of blown away with, because I didn't realize, obviously we knew it existed, but I didn't know it was quite this severe. There can be up to a 5-year chronological or a 5-year biological age difference in kids with the same chronological age. 5 years. So just think about that. If you've had 2 kids, I've got 3 that are roughly 4 years apart each. And I think about where each one of those kids are at, and the thought of another 10-year-old, let's say, being kind of the biological age of a 12 or 13 or 14-year-old, or vice versa, younger, you're not talking about the same athlete. Those are two totally different athletes. So we just need to be aware that this exists. We need to stop asking for the kids' birth certificates. We need to stop being silly about it and saying, they need to be playing up, or they got some big boys on that team, blah, 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 blah. Just stop. Just stop. It is what it is. The kid didn't control how he grew. You don't control how your kid grows. It's a fact, and it's something that we just need to acknowledge and get on with. If a team looks like, if you're playing in a 10U tournament, the team looks like a bunch of 14-year-olds and they, beat your team down, you don't need to check the birth certificates. You need to just say, hey, this is how it is sometimes. And you need to keep developing your kids. Because what will happen is, once your kids develop, they'll be there. They'll be there. Just takes time. So while kids are developing, on the neurological side of things, we are neurologically mature by age 12. So that's an important thing to understand, because neurology kind of drives the wiring, the reaction time, the motor skills, those things. And so those are developing and mature by age 12. So again, the more stimulus we can provide our kids with at these younger ages, the better it's going to help them while this wiring, this neurological wiring, is developing. And so from ages 0 to 5, that is when your gross motor skills really develop. So we've all seen this. First you crawl, then you walk, then you run. It's the movement and the coordination of the larger muscles of the body. So the arms, legs, and torso. So walking, running, jumping, climbing, all those things. Those are gross motor skills. Ages 5 to 9, some of the fine motor skills start to develop. And really that's the small muscles of the hands and the fingers and the wrist. And so we use these to perform more precise actions. And, these would be writing, drawing, tying your shoelaces, using utensils to eat, stuff like that. So again, 0 to 5, lower body, big body movements, develop those skills, gross motor skills. And then as they age 5 to 9, that's when they really start to develop those fine motor skills. So if we've got a 6-year-old out there, they may really be struggling with fine motor skills. Hand-eye coordination, dexterity, control. So it's not fair to judge them against kids that may be more advanced. Maybe they're a little further along in that development of fine motor skills. There's nothing wrong with our kid, It's just where they're at in their development. And so let's seek those things. They don't need more swings. It's not going to hurt them, but let's find something that's fun, that's rewarding. And that that transitions it a little bit for me to talk about the difference between deliberate practice and deliberate play. So deliberate practice is really what we do most of the time with our kids. It's highly structured. It requires effort. It generates no immediate rewards. And it's really motivated by the goal of improving performance. So it's not built for fun. It's drills, it's repetitions, it's tee work, it's practices where we're hitting infield or those type of things. And so that's typically the route that we go with most everything. We show up, we have schedule, run through it, whatever. And again, I'm not criticizing. This is the way I've always done things as well. So it's important that we're learning this together, because it's something that's going to change for me and for my teams. But on the other side of that is deliberate play. So deliberate play, think recess, right? It's intrinsically motivating. It's designed to maximize fun and enjoyment, and it really provides immediate gratification. Now, I read this years ago. It should have stuck better than it did. I forget it sometimes, But kids, before age 12 and even some periods after age 12, they really have a hard time thinking about the future and planning for the future. And so, we say things to our kids like, you understand if you're going to be good, you got to work hard. And it really doesn't mean that much to them. They'll spout it back to you, and they'll tell you, if you ask them, they'll tell you, it's important. But in action, many times it's like, what are you thinking? And the reality is that they're not. It's that what they're doing at this practice, this drill that you have them doing, they're bored out of their mind. It's not intrinsically fun. It's not rewarding for them. And so they're just not in it. And so we can get mad at the kid, or we can understand that this is the phase of development that they're in, and let's make sure that we do appropriate things for them at that age group so that it is intrinsically rewarding, so they do continue to learn, and it's not impossible, and it doesn't turn you into a juice box team. It's just age appropriate. And we started some of this in the fall. We had really good results in terms of competitive games and other things that got them excited, that got them more into it. They were much more aware, and I think the end product was better. Even though, yes, in your mind, it's so hard to let go of that idea. Let me get 30 more minutes of drill work, let me get these bullpens in, let me get this, that. Like, we just get so worked up about making sure that we're maximizing our time, and we just forget sometimes where the kids are. So these are the recommendations: deliberate practice versus deliberate play. Before age 12, the recommendation is 80% is spent on deliberate play. Very different. Very different from the way I've run things, very different from the way I see most other teams run things. So food for thought there. 80% on deliberate play, reduces to about 50% ages 13 to 15. So again, we're starting to see, okay, kids see a little bit better understanding of long-term development. They can understand that, hey, maybe I do this today, it generates rewards in the future. A little better understanding there. And so it's about 50-50. So 50% deliberate play, 50% deliberate practice, and then ages 16 plus, 20% deliberate play. So, important takeaways. I've rambled on for a while now. Developing overall athleticism. We have to. If we want to maximize genetic potential, and I'll break this down in a later episode, but we're looking at about 50-50 nature versus nurture. So 50% is our genotype. That's what we're given by our genes. That's our cross-section of muscle fibers. That's how our energy systems function. All those different things. We got about 50% from nature, and then about 45-ish% is environmental factors and other factors. So we'll break this down in later episodes, but just understand that we need to make sure we take advantage of these developmental windows, ages 12 and under, to really build those motor skills at the appropriate stage of neurological development so that these kids have a good base for further training when they have the testosterone and they can experience the muscle growth and the overall body growth to really take advantage of it. Versus trying to learn to move at that age of 13 and 14 and 15, having to learn to move their body well and then try to train. You just miss so much of that period. Second part, as far as takeaways, just an appropriate mix of deliberate play and deliberate practice, and making sure that we're incorporating plenty of activities that are intrinsically rewarding for these kids. So making sure that in that moment, they can have fun out of it. And listen, I am as crusty old of a ball coach as there is. So for those that might fight with this idea, I get it. Like, the game should be fun. The game itself should be fun. It should be fun to shag balls all day. Listen, that was fun for me. But I didn't have a PlayStation, a Switch. I didn't have Fortnite with my buddies to play at home. I didn't have all these, that's just a tiny scratching the surface of things that can entertain kids these days, or things that they can be into. So I didn't have all that. So I can't be crusty and just say, these kids these days, whatever. That's not going to get us anywhere. So we got to figure out what it is and push the right buttons to make sure that we meet the kids where they're at and that they develop appropriately. So again, we'll go deeper in this, but my hope for today is that as parents, as coaches, we just begin to understand developmental stages a little bit better. And we understand the importance of building these bases. And you better believe we will have programs. We already have some on the website, but we'll continue to build programs that attempt to address this, that kids can do at home, that they can do with no equipment, that they can do with no supervision, to build these things so it's easy, it's fun, it's rewarding, it's quick, and they can build it without it having to become this big thing. Last thing I'll say. Well, let me say this. So let me talk about just briefly long-term athletic development model. So this model really is built on 4 principles, and the 4 principles are this. The first is enjoyment. Obviously, we talked about that. Got to have fun. Got to enjoy what they're doing. The second is striving for improvement. So immediately for those that go, oh, he's advocating for juice box teams, absolutely not. They need to strive for improvement, but it's going to look different than what we think it does sometimes. And that's the next principle. So the next principle is appropriate training. So meeting them where they're at, making sure that the training speaks to the developmental stage that they're in, and practicing accordingly. And then the last is do no harm. So certainly we don't want to do anything that harms them physically, but just as equally as much, we don't want to do anything that harms them mentally, where they don't want to play the game anymore, or it's a chore to go to practice or to work on it. So again, those 4 principles: long-term athletic development, enjoyment, striving for improvement, age-appropriate, developmental stage-appropriate training, and then doing no harm. I'll close with this. I'm begging you to understand, to hear me when I say this. Your kids are not falling behind if they don't specialize in baseball at 6 or 7 or 8 years old. Any pressures out there that say otherwise, that you have to play year-round, that you have to train year-round, that you have to go through the whole summer, and that you have to go through the winter, and that you can't do other things, and you got to sacrifice everything to follow this path, it is not true. We love baseball here at Asking for Knowledge. We're going to continue to advocate for baseball, but we want to maximize potential. And believe me, if focusing only on baseball was the best way to do that, we'd be shouting it from the mountaintops. But it's not. There's a lot of other factors. And we're going to continue to kind of peel that onion as time goes on. So look for more episodes related to that. If you are enjoying the show, please subscribe. Please share with a friend. We are not putting any budgeting towards promotion, and so the only way this thing is going to grow is if you share it with folks. Interact with our social profiles. Come up with topics for us. If you got things that you want us to talk about, throw it up there. Shoot us a message. Let us know what those things are. We want to make sure we're bringing things that are relevant and appropriate to the folks that are interested in this. You can participate in our surveys, give us real-time feedback, or you can just shoot us a line. Call us, DM us, or shoot us an email. Let us know what's on your mind. We appreciate you. Hope you have a great week. And until next time, keep asking for knowledge.